Hi, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. Sorry we missed you 2 weeks ago, but glad to see you back. We are here today with Paige. She has Post Concussion Podcast, and she's going to talk to us about that today. Just so you know, we do have Web Wednesdays scheduled all the way through November right now, and I even have December 1st scheduled too, so I'm working on getting us all through to winter here. Hopefully not too soon winter, but yeah, so keep joining us. Your CE requests will be right next to the recording. Usually by the end of the day tomorrow, these are all up on our website, so you can fill out that request and I'll get that back to you within about a week or so. But I think that's all my housekeeping.
Right.
So Bella, thank you so much for joining us, and go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to talk about mental health, a lot of mistakes that I made. It's been about 9 years now that I've been dealing with all of this. And I made a lot of mistakes, mostly from being a stubborn teenager, but I like to share those. And then also mental health is a big thing that I talk about a lot because I think it's really missed a lot when it comes to brain injuries and concussions and all those things. So I have a quick disclosure. I just like to have it there. It's just because I am not a medical professional. I have no medical training. This is all based on experience and talking with others and living through it. So how many concussions is too many is something people ask me all of the time. And I always like to tell them that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've had one brain injury or 10 or you can't count, because that's kind of where I am. I tell most people I've had 10 plus because 10 plus sounds better than some absurd number. And that makes people kind of get it. But I talk to lots of people on my podcast and lots of people every day where it was just one head injury, one brain injury, and it completely rearranged their life. So it's really important to not be discouraged or to compare yourself next to other people because their brain injuries seem more severe than yours, because that part doesn't matter. So I'm going to talk about a few of my accidents. So one of them was a fall off of a horse. I was cantering, which is down the long side of an arena, and my pony tripped. And at this time I was about 14. And when she tripped, I went head first into the dirt. And then I got up, brushed myself off, made sure she was okay. I limped to the mounting block and got back on. And I rode for another hour and a half about that day and didn't think about my head. All I thought about was, oh, my knee hurts. And I ended up having headaches that whole summer, but didn't think too much about it. I didn't really stress about it. I just remember the headaches didn't really go away. And a couple of years before that was a snowboarding accident. And this was another one where I didn't think about my head. I was about 8 years old and two of my friends decided to race. So there was two starts at the top of a hill and they met up. And we decided to race to meet in front of this jump. And meeting in front of a jump, now that I'm older, seems like a really bad idea. But when you're 8 years old, it seems like a great spot to meet each other. And so I got there first, and I'm sitting in front of the jump. And it happened to be reading week here. And that meant a lot of university students and college students weren't going to school. So they were along the hill that day. Well, the one flew over the jump and landed on top of me. And we rolled down the hill together. And I remember getting up and just kind of limping all the way back to the chalet. And then I went to dance actually the next day. And it was them who called my mom and said, Bella seems really off today. Like, I know she said she hurt her knee, but she's acting funny. She's slurring. She's not really herself. We're concerned. We're going to make her sit down. Maybe you should come get her. And that's when I put together that I might have a head injury. And so a lot of my head injuries were like that. They were just fluke incidents where I didn't really think about my head until I started dealing with daily headaches. And so I had all of these injuries. And I think at this point, I had about 7 concussions or so. And the one that I got with the horse fall wasn't the one that started the constant headaches. None of them started it. It was just a combination of all of them. It was like this, I kept hitting my head and I kept kind of recovering. And then eventually those headaches didn't stop. And it started in about January. One year, I wasn't living at home. I was a competitive athlete, show jumping horses. I was actually living in Florida, and I'm from Canada, and I was living there. And I started getting a headache every day. And at this time, I was about 14, 15. I was 15. And I didn't tell anyone for about 8 months. And that's 8 months of not telling your parents or your coaches or your friends that you are suffering from a headache every day. But I also lied to myself a lot about those headaches. I told myself that, oh, it's from stress. Oh, you've been up since 6 a.m. every single day. You're just really tired. And then I wasn't sleeping a lot the next summer coming up. And I wasn't living at home, so my parents wouldn't see that I was struggling. And I was really good at hiding it. That was my problem through all of this, was I could just hide the pain. And that's what I did. And then it kind of caught up with me. I was living away from home and I kind of passed out getting off of a horse out of a ring. I went into the ring. I was in so much pain and my vision was blacking in and out, and I just carried on. And then I left the ring, got off my horse, and my best friend caught me and they said, "What is wrong?" And I was like, "Oh, heat stroke." And because I was super competitive and being an athlete was my life. So I didn't think of anything else. When a few years before, I was told that this is all you're going to do. This is your career. Like, you don't need to plan anything else out. And my parents were all for it. Everybody was like, here is your life for the next 10 years. And when you're told that when you're 14, and then when you're 15, you're afraid it's going to change, you kind of don't tell anyone that you're getting ill. But I really should have told someone, because hopefully I could have gotten therapy and things a lot sooner than I did. So what happened was I was getting adrenaline rushes from competing and showing. And then September, so it had been 8 months by now. And in September, I moved home to go to school. And that is when it all caught up with me, because the adrenaline rushes were gone and it was becoming a lot harder to hide the pain. So I couldn't get out of bed. I became severely depressed. I remember I deleted all of my social media because I couldn't watch other people live their lives while I couldn't get out of bed. And that was really hard. And all of a sudden, my parents didn't know what to do. And I always say it was like hitting a brick wall, because my whole life was going, and then all of a sudden, everything halted on me. And I wasn't able to do anything. I lived in bed. This was when the recommendation of living in a dark room was a big thing. We've learned a lot from that, but that's what we learned, we're taught and told then. So that's what I did. And then I couldn't get out of the dark room because I had been living in it. And my depression was really bad. So I didn't really know what to do. And neither did my parents. And I couldn't do school. I was going once a week and then I was sleeping the rest of the week. So that's what started doing every single therapy under the sun. And I mean it. I can't actually list them all. And I always like to ask, what type of patient are you? Because I was not a good patient. And that is because I was a teenager and I was stubborn. So I didn't want to be this kid that was at therapy all day. And I didn't want to be the kid that had a pill box, that had to take pills every morning, every afternoon, and at night. I didn't want to do it. So I would do it for about 3 months. And then I would just quit. I would quit every therapy and I would tell my parents I'm done. And then a few weeks later, I'd be like, okay, I need to go back. And that was like a common cycle that I went through. And even mental health therapy, I didn't like any of the mental health therapists that I saw. And my parents were flying me around the world trying to help with these headaches because the headaches wouldn't stop. I was in extreme pain every day, and they lasted for about 7 years. The first 2 years were the worst, and the last 2 were the best. And now I don't get them. So they improved, but it took a long time. And I couldn't tell you what therapy was the number one thing. People always ask what worked, but I tried so many things. I think it's a combination, which is why I think it's so important to try so many things. You have to try what will work for you. I did acupuncture, I did hyperbaric oxygen chambers, I did eye therapy, I did physical therapy, and you just have to keep trying because what worked for me might not work for you. And that's okay because everyone's brain is different. So I did the medication thing is what most people start with, is what I always call it, like the medication cycle, where they put you on a medication and then you come back in 3 months and tell them if it helped. And then you do it again and again and again. Well, I started with that as well as therapy. And two side effects I got really bad from those. One of them was night terrors that were so bad that actually my family made me go off of the med because I was scaring them at night. And then the other one was weight loss. So I was taking one medication and it was helping with the headaches, not a lot, but enough that I could function. Like I was going out a little bit more, I could socialize a little bit more, I wasn't living in bed. And this medication in 3 months, I lost 20 pounds from what I weigh right now. So losing 20 pounds in 3 months is crazy. It's not a good thing. I didn't have 20 pounds to lose. And it's because over those 3 months, I started eating less and less because the meds would make me throw up or it would be excruciating pain in my stomach. So I got smaller and smaller. But as I got smaller and smaller, the comments got harder to deal with because I get comments like, I wish I was small like you. Where's that magical pill? And I remember thinking people were wishing they were sick. And it took me time to remind myself that they weren't wishing they were sick. They just don't realize how sick I am. They're just seeing this small girl and they don't realize that I'm living in sweatpants because my clothes don't fit. And I'm not leaving the house because I looked like a ghost. And then I had to do about 2 years of nutrition and dietitian therapy to relearn how to eat. And it's never something you never plan to do any of this. You never plan to relearn how to eat. And it started with smoothies and snacks and nuts, and then things throughout the 2 years to finally start being able to eat 2 full meals. And I am so glad that I had a good nutritionist because I like to talk about how some people really saved me, and she's one of them because she didn't judge me when after a week I wouldn't hit any of the goals. I would hit none of them and she would not be mad at me. She'd be like, this is okay. We're going to recreate goals and maybe shorten them and then try again. And those really helped me because I didn't have to give up because she didn't judge me or shame me for not reaching goals that we had set the week before. And so I tried a lot of therapies and some of them really helped. Some of them I call them, like, I went to witch doctors, as I like to call them, because they're not really classified as anything, but they say they help. And to me, that's all I wanted. I just wanted to get back to my normal life. I wanted to show jump again. I wanted to be a competitive athlete. So I just kept going and kept pushing myself. And that wasn't always the best thing. So something I dealt with a lot when I had these extreme headaches was a lot of anger and a lot of lack of control of this anger. And somebody who dealt with it the most is my mom, because she's the one who was always there. She's the one who slept at the bottom of my hospital bed. She's the one who was home all day with me because I couldn't get out of bed. And she's the one that I would scream at when she would ask me how I was. She'd be like, are you okay today? And I would lose it. And I was really angry at a lot of things. I was angry at myself because I hid those headaches for 8 months. And I believe that maybe if I didn't, I would have been a lot better off than I was. I was angry at the medical centers and all those things because they couldn't help me. But I've learned a lot now from that the brain is a mystery. So it's really not their fault. But when you're a teenager or starting to deal with this, you get really angry dealing with that. And I would take out all my anger on my mom. And I always say, we take out anger on people that we know won't walk away. My mom wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't going to just walk out the door because I screamed at her. She might not be happy. She might be crying because I was kind of like a little monster for a little bit. And I am really sorry. I've apologized to her a million times for it. And some days I would apologize right after. Other days I wouldn't. And I was just kind of in a blind rage when I had the headaches. And then I dealt with having to forgive myself because I was angry at myself for putting myself in this situation. And I had to realize that like that's not how this works. You can't be blaming yourself for what you're going through. You have to forgive yourself. And that was a really big step for me. And then I also learned to count my fingers before I would talk if I was in a really bad mood. So I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I would talk so that I wasn't just lashing out with the first thought that came to my mind, because usually that wasn't a good thought and it wasn't a good reaction to the conversation I was having. So that helped me slow down and calm down a lot of what I was doing, because I didn't want to be this angry teenager lashing out at my mom every day, but I also didn't want to be this teenager who was living in a bed 24/7. So there was a lot of give and take with a lot of it. And I have a lot of siblings, and they had interesting times trying to understand what was going on with me. So my oldest sister is a nurse, and I used to get something, my doctors called them pain attacks. They were like a mix of a pain attack and a panic attack. So they would happen after I was in pain for so many days. So I was in excruciating pain. And so they used to happen all the time. Now I haven't had one in over a year. And what happens is my whole body goes white. I can't breathe. Feel like a ghost. I almost pass out. It's like a panic attack. I remember I was standing outside. I don't know what temperature it would be for you guys, but it was -20 in Canada, so really cold. There's snow outside, and I was in shorts and a tank top standing outside trying to breathe and cool off my body because I felt like 1,000,000 degrees. And I remember my sister, who's a nurse, is like calling 911 because she's so concerned. And I'm like, no, this happens all the time. And it's just interesting. And I remember that moment so clearly. And there's a lot of moments in the past that are completely gone, but that is one that I'm like, no, don't call anyone. It's fine. It goes away. And then my little sister was confused because I did well at night. So I would sleep all night, sleep all day. But then around like 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, I would kind of be able to get up and do things. So when she'd come home from school, she'd be like, well, she's fine. Why isn't she going to school? She seems okay. And she was younger than I was, so she didn't understand. I remember in the mornings, she'd be going off to school yelling because I wasn't going to school. And it took her time to get over that as well. And that's something on my podcast we talk about a lot, is family, because family is missed. Nobody supported my family. Nobody told my parents what to expect and what to do. And nobody talked to my siblings on how to handle me because I was all over the map. And like my head was really sensitive. You couldn't touch it. They didn't know how to react to that. I was angry all the time, or sad, or very depressed through all of this. And it's something that was missed with a lot of people because I could smile through it. And I was one of those people that's just like, la, 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 like everything is fine, but everything is not fine. And I did that for years. And I also was talking about how I overheated. Brain inflammation is really common. I'm sure a lot of you know that. And dealing with, I always call it, my head felt like it was on fire all the time. And I would try like diet and all these things, and I'd be like putting ice on my head. I remember always I was told my family that I wanted to drill a hole in my head to let the pressure out because it felt like my brain was going to explode. And I was like, they did this a long time ago. I was like, I want them to do it again. And so you just have to keep positive while you go through all of this, because I had a lot of support, but I needed better support, more for the mental things that my family didn't provide, but I didn't learn that until later on. So I went to high school and university while I was going through this. It started when I was in high school. And high school was interesting because I didn't know anything about it. So I didn't know how to vouch for myself. I didn't know how to get accommodations. So I actually have a toolkit that I'll put a link for in the chat for people if they want it. That's kind of tips for students, tips for parents, and then a letter for teachers to give, because sometimes you don't know where to start. I had one teacher try to remove me from school because you have so many required attendance days, and I didn't meet those despite doctor notes. And he tried to remove me from school. And I remember having to fight that. And my mom was livid and angry. But he would say, well, I saw her yesterday. She looked fine. she was laughing and hanging out with her friends, and then she's not at school all week. He's like, I don't understand. And so that was a big learning curve for me, that he didn't see that I was ill, because when I was there, I looked okay. I didn't look ill. I looked like I look right now. So that took me some time to get through. And I had an amazing guidance counselor, luckily, who helped me do summer courses and reduce my course load so that I could graduate, because graduating seems like this big daunting task when you are in school, and especially when you're dealing with a brain injury. But it doesn't matter if you graduate on time. It doesn't actually matter in the end, but it seems like it when you're younger. And I find it really helps to believe in yourself. And I lucked out, like I have tips for parents in this toolkit, and that's because my parents made a big difference. They believed me when I said I couldn't go to school in the morning. They believed me when I'd call and say, could someone pick me up? I know I drove here this morning, but I'm too dizzy to drive home. I know it's the middle of the day. Things like that really made a big difference for me. And then making a schedule that worked. I did one class Monday, one class Tuesday, one class Wednesday, one class Thursday. And that's all I did for about 6 months. And that's okay, because I managed to do it. Or accommodations, like I had extra time on tests, assignments I could extend, which happened a lot because of headaches. And all those types of things are really important to set up for yourself if you're in school, because it's so much to organize, and school is already really stressful on kids without them even realizing it. So when you add noise sensitivity, light sensitivity, I had very big memory problems. I couldn't remember what I read off a page. I would read the page and I couldn't tell you it was at the top. I couldn't read a book anymore. So lots of those things I needed help with. And it took me some time to organize it. But in university, I got a lot better because I knew what to ask for. I knew what I needed. And it made a huge difference when doing that. So something I like to talk about a lot is my hat. And I always wore a hat for about the whole 7 years. I was in a hat, either a baseball cap or a toque. I even slept in a toque some days. And it was because I was terrified of someone touching my head. And it would help me in crowds because I wouldn't like people coming close to me. And I wouldn't like anyone possibly touching my head. And it felt like, like there's this little, very thin barrier on my head. And it made me feel a lot better when going out in public. It took me time to kind of get over that. Like I don't wear it as much now, but I do wear it for like sun protection. So I always wear a hat when I'm out in the sun in the summer, otherwise I get headaches. Other things that I do, wear sunglasses. I wear, if you guys have heard of Theraspecs, I wear those. They're like blue light filtering, but they also have a sunglass version for outdoors. So it's polarized sunglasses and the blue filtering. So you get both. So I wear those a lot now, and they make a big difference. And then I also do a really funny thing in the summer when I'm at the lake. I actually dunk my head under the water every hour because, like I said, my head gets really hot. Even today, even with diet, some days in the sun, I feel it a lot more than most people would just sitting at a lake. So every hour I'll be like, oh, I need to cool myself off. So you can even do that at home. Just every hour, go put a cold cloth on the back of your neck. Something to kind of like, oh, okay, it's good. I know it's really hot out and I'm pushing myself, but you can kind of help find ways to adapt to your lifestyle. That's always my biggest thing. So I'm not 100%. I will probably never be 100%, but I'm very happy now. I live a very fulfilling life, and it's because it's very adapted to what works for me and what doesn't. So I always like to say this quote because it was really important to me, and that's because I couldn't heal because I kept pretending that I wasn't hurt. And I did this at the end of high school. I did this a lot. I told everyone and myself that I was better, actually, because I was managing to go to school more. I was going out more. So I moved all the way across the country to go to university and ride horses. And I told everyone that I was better, and I was not. I still had a headache every day. And I had to remind myself that it's not normal to have a headache every day. But to me, it felt like it because it had been about 2 years, over 2 years now. So I just carried on and told everyone I was good. So I moved across the country to go to school and ride horses. So I went from barely going to high school to going to university, which is a huge jump for most people, and also riding horses full time. Well, it caught up with me really fast. I actually spent a night in total darkness because my vision disappeared in November that year. I ended up calling my mom a few hours later and I said, "Help, what do I do?" And she's like, "Help, what do I do?" I was like, "I couldn't call anyone because I live in an apartment by myself and everything went black and I'm not walking out my apartment door. I don't know anyone who lives in the hallway." And I remember I was terrified. And I remember feeling like I was a big failure. And it took me a few weeks to admit to my parents that I needed to move home because I was not okay to do this yet. I needed my family. I needed support. I needed treatment still, even though I was going where I had moved. I needed a lot more than what I was getting. And I remember talking to my older sister and telling her, "I have a big midterm tomorrow and I haven't read the book because I can't read still. So what am I supposed to do?" And she's like, "Well, slow down. How about you come home and then we'll reassess and redo this all." So that's what I did. I moved home, switched schools, kind of took a big break and then reset, got proper accommodations in school. Wasn't riding horses multiple days a week because my head could not handle it. I got tips and help for the memory. I got memory aids in school because I really needed those. And then I took less classes because I went from barely doing high school to a full university course load, which was way too much and way too much of a jump. So I did all of that. And then I went home and I was just, everything improved when I moved home. And it was just to remind myself that it's okay to tell people you're hurt. And I had a big problem with feeling like I was a burden. I didn't like that sympathetic look people would get when you tell them what's going on, or that doubting look my parents would get, or the stress look they would get because I was still dealing with this. It took me some time to be like, it's better to tell them than not to. So I had a big fear of going backwards in recovery because I got a few head injuries after all this started, and quite a few. And that's because I have an adrenaline junkie side and it doesn't really help the head injury thing. So I got in one accident, snowmobiling, and I got in another riding accident, two big ones. One of them I ended up in an ambulance. And this is the one that scared me the most because I remember I was on my horse and he ended up bucking me off and running me over. And I was laying there and I remember I called my boyfriend and said, "Help." I didn't have my breath. I couldn't get up. I was laying on the ground and he gets there and he's like, "Well, I'm calling an ambulance." And I'm like, "No, I don't want to go to the hospital. They're not going to help. I'm fine." And I did end up going in an ambulance to the hospital that day. And one thing that I remember really clearly that day was the pain scale. I find is something that's really controversial because my 10 out of 10 isn't your 10 out of 10. I lived at a 10 out of 10 for years, or 11 out of 10. And so when I went to the hospital that day and I'm strapped to a board and I talked to a physician and they said, "What's your pain level?" And I said 11 out of 10. And he said, "No, I don't believe you." And I was like, "What do you mean you don't believe me?" He's like, "Well, you're not crying, you're not screaming." I'm like, "Yeah, but I live with chronic pain. I live at an 8 out of 10. I remember it was just a shock to me because and then it reminded me that the pain scale is such a varying term. And you kind of have to explain behind that, because if you live with chronic pain and you tell someone you're an 8 out of 10, you should probably tell them that you live with chronic pain because your 8 out of 10 is probably more severe than someone else's. And so I had crazy fear. I remember I was bawling the next day and I did have a headache, but I was so upset that I might have reset things that I had improved. This was a few years after this had all started. My headaches were less severe. I was going to school. I was going to work once in a while, and I was terrified that all of these things would come back. And then now I dirt bike. And it kind of seems crazy when I tell people on the podcast, and they always look at me like, what do you mean you ride dirt bikes for fun? And I had to find something that helped with my mental health when I quit riding, because I needed something with the adrenaline rush, but something I could do casually, and I couldn't ride horses casually. I always explain it as the piece of cake. So if you have a cake in front of you and you take a piece of cake, it's really hard to not take another, at least when it comes to me and cake. But if I don't touch that cake at all, I do a lot better. So that's how I started working with riding horses in my mental health. If I would ride casually, all of a sudden my head would start spinning. I guess a year ago now, I rode for like a month, or not even a week. I think I rode a few times, and I went for a walk with one of my best friends, and we're walking and I'm talking about show jumping and competing and buying more horses. And my girlfriend stopped me. She's like, slow down, Bella. She's like, you've rode 4 times. She's like, you're not okay yet. She's like, she's like, if you can't do this casually, then maybe you shouldn't do it at all. And that's what I kind of realized, that I couldn't do it. I couldn't take a piece of the cake. I needed the whole cake. So if I leave the cake over there, I do a lot better. And so that's how I do with not riding horses. So I dirt bike, and I dirt bike with like more protection than the typical person. Not that it prevents brain injuries, as we all know, but I can't let my injury control my life and my happiness. And it took time. Like, I don't have a headache every day now that I do this. Like, I am a lot better now that I've decided to ride dirt bikes and things like that. Yes, it drives my family absolutely insane that I do this, and they are completely terrified every single day, probably. But I can do it casually. I can ride once a week, once every 2 weeks, and it's just enough to give me that little bit of adrenaline rush, kind of a stress reliever, and then carry on. And I really needed that. Everybody needs something, and that was my thing. So while in university, I actually ended up attempting suicide. And it was actually when I thought I was doing a lot better. And it was kind of a big shock to me, actually, and my family. And it just is a reminder of understanding how much pain a person can be in, even though they are smiling and laughing. So I have a big warning sign, and that is running. And I came to realize that after this. And that is because every single time in my life that I have started running, it is because I am overly stressed and don't know what to do about it. So I run and I run and I run. And I actually do not like to run at all. If you ask me, I'm not running from here to like 10 feet away. I'm walking. I don't like to run. So what I did was I was running. I was running a few times a day. And I remember my mom was really worried about me. And she's like, what's wrong? You don't usually run this much. And I'm running and running and running. And then I ended up in the hospital. And I remember my family's faces was probably the hardest part of all of it, dealing with all of them. And then also I felt really numb. So a lot of people were like, oh, were you really thankful after? And I am thankful now, but at the time I definitely wasn't. I remember my parents and family drove me nuts because they wouldn't let me out of their sight. So I had to choose between mandatory therapy and outpatient therapy, and I chose outpatient therapy, but that was only if my family wouldn't leave me alone. So that meant they drove me to go see my horse. That means they sat there while I did puzzles, because I did a lot of puzzles then, because I find they allow me to turn my brain off, and I needed to not run to do that. And so I was numb for about 2 months, and I did mandatory therapy after that. And that is what honestly saved my life. And that is what I'm going to talk about next. So I was doing a lot better during all of this, actually. I was doing pretty well in school. My headaches were less severe, but my mental health was still forgotten. Despite the few therapy sessions I had been put in, I had never learned to handle all these terrible thoughts, like, why are we living like this when I had bad headache days? Or why are we still in school when we still can't read a book? Like, you can't remember yesterday. What are you doing? Lots of things like that. And my brain would spiral and spiral and spiral. to a point that I'd be vibrating and shaking and not know how to get the thoughts to stop. So that is where mandatory therapy, I always like to say, it was like the final piece of my puzzle. I was doing better, but I hadn't touched this part. This part needed help. And so mandatory therapy made a really big difference for me because I finally got a therapist that I liked. And I learned that that is a huge piece. Finding someone that you click with, that you get along with, and then you like the way that they do therapy. Because I've seen therapists even after this therapy, and some of them I'm like, oh no, never coming back. I'm finding another one, because you have to click. And you might need to give it more than one session because that's a little bit extreme, but you have to click with them and their methods have to click with you. So 3 of the methods that worked for me to get these thoughts to slow down. The first one was pick a word. So my favorite word, I always used to use think, because I couldn't stop thinking. And you would close your eyes and picture this word in the sky and spell it backwards and forwards and spell it again and again. And it would kind of be like a grounding distraction technique. The next one was pick an object. So this one works really well for me. I even use it today when I get stressed out or get overwhelmed with something. You pick an object in front of you. One thing that my therapist always used was a chair. And you start with, this is a chair. This chair is white. This chair has 4 legs. This chair has this many, and you just keep describing it in better and more detail. And it would just kind of help me bring me to, okay, we are okay. We are driving down the road, but we are okay. And I actually would need it. I've done it to a steering wheel. And it's helped me calm down those thoughts, because for some reason, driving is when all of these thoughts like to come flooding my brain. And the next one is the head to toe. So you start with your toes and you clench every part of your body and then slowly release it. And that really helped me. So I'd start with my toes and then relax them, and start with my legs and then relax them, and my arms and relax them. And it just kind of helped me breathe, because I wasn't breathing. I would just become so overwhelmed with everything. And it took me a long time to realize that I needed to talk about my mental health. And I also needed to learn that I needed to talk to professionals about my mental health, because I always told myself, I have really good friends, I have good siblings, my parents are great. Why do I need a therapist? And I realized that my friends aren't going to give me these methods that I just explained here. They're not going to explain to me how to use them. They're not going to take the time to give me tools to live my everyday life. So it took me some time to get through that, but it has benefited me so much. And I always recommend therapy, but I also understand that therapy is expensive. And so I always like to mention that there's different alternatives to therapy. There's group therapy. Your brain injury network, like the one here, I'm sure they have different therapists that you can try to reach out to. There's apps that you can do text therapy with, which are very cheap. And I always like to mention them because a lot of people can't work when they're going through this. So finding alternatives and cheaper alternatives are always worthwhile and trying to look into. And so don't push it out of the question just because you think a therapy session will cost you $100, because there is alternatives to that type of therapy. So something I like to talk about a lot on the podcast is why we don't recognize our own progress in brain injury recovery. And that's because we're recovering backwards, as I always like to say. I knew how to read before all of this. I knew how to remember 10 numbers that you just listed. I knew how to walk. I knew how to talk without stumbling and word finding. I knew how to be happy. I knew how to live without pain. So what you are learning are things that you've already done. And maybe you're learning how to do them better, but you are relearning things that you've done before. So it seems like such insignificant improvements, but it's all so important. Me being able to read 1 page or half a page instead of no pages is a very big improvement. Being able to make 10 steps instead of 8 steps is a very big improvement. And it's important to recognize those things, because it's really easy to kind of forget that you are improving. I remember I forgot, like even to this day, I forget how far I've come And it kind of reminds me when I do the podcast and talk to people, or right now when I talk about the whole story. And this is like a small snippet of this story. If I tell the whole thing, I think it's about 24 hours long to just talk about it. But it's really important to remind yourself that you have come really far. I forget all the time how far I've come, but I'm sitting here and doing this, and I wouldn't have done this 9 years ago. And 2 years ago, I didn't, or 3 years ago now, I wouldn't have talked about mental health at all. I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell anyone that I was struggling. And when I said I didn't expect it then, I didn't, because in high school is when I had notes in my drawer for my whole family, because that is when I was living with extreme pain, like brutal pain. And that is when I was like, I don't really want to be here. So it was important then to get therapy, but I realized that it's important all the time. Even right now, I'm in therapy because it helps. And doing all this is, I talk with survivors every day, and it brings up things, but it also gives me great ideas on how to do better. And I think that's really helpful as well. So something else I like to talk about is toxic positivity. So just be positive, or it could be worse, are two of the most dismissive things that I've ever been told. I never liked it when people were like, oh, it could be worse. I'm like, yeah, but I'm really upset with what I'm dealing with right now. So I think it's really important to acknowledge your emotions. Like, it is important to acknowledge that you're sad right now, but it's also important to help people work through their emotions rather than just dismiss them and tell them to be positive. There is nothing wrong with being positive. You have to be positive to get through this and improve and get through recovery and even help someone through recovery. Without a positive mindset, it's very hard, but it doesn't mean you have to ignore the emotions that you're dealing with. And it doesn't mean you have to pretend it could be worse and then make that seem like this is a good situation. It's good to just be positive overall, because you have to believe in yourself that you can get better, or believe in someone else that they can get better. But it is okay to accept that things are really hard right now, or I'm having trouble right now mentally. And it is okay to accept those things. You can't prepare for the fact that this is invisible. Nobody prepares you for a brain injury. Nobody prepares you that while you're walking down the street, no one knows you're struggling. And so it's really important to just breathe and acknowledge what's going on and be positive, but not toxic positivity, because I find it's really extreme. And I used to get a lot of comments from people, and I found they were really hard to deal with. And I had to remind myself that they're getting the cover in a few chapters. Say they're getting the cover of who they know who I am. And then I tell them chapter 2 and chapter 6 and chapter 10, but they don't have the rest of the chapters. So you have to remember that when they are making comments or talking to you, that they don't know your whole book. No one knows your whole story. Even your parents don't know it, because I didn't tell my parents everything, and I doubt you did either. So it's really important to remember that as well. So my favorite thing to explain about mental health is mental health in a box. So it's a very common explanation for grief, but I like it for mental health. And so how it starts is stage 1. So you have this giant ball spinning in your box, and you have this red button, which is depression, suicidal thoughts, bad times, anxiety. And when you are very mentally ill, you hit this button constantly. Your ball is so big that it never feels like you get a break. And then you slowly improve to stage 2, where you hit it a little less, and stage 3, where you're still hitting it, but the ball never leaves the box, and neither does the button. And that's what I think is really important. I am very happy now. I am doing very well, but the ball is still in the box. So there are still days that I have bad mental health, but that doesn't mean that I'm not happy. It doesn't mean that I'm going backwards in my recovery. And sometimes this ball shrinks and sometimes it grows. But you have to remember that even though the ball never leaves the box, doesn't mean you can't improve it. And doesn't mean you're not happy, doesn't mean you're not improving. And I just think it's a really good method to kind of understand when you have those bad days. Like, I'll have a great month, and all of a sudden I push myself too much on a Sunday, and Monday and Tuesday I'm in bed. and I get really down on myself. And it took me a long time to be like, okay, it's okay that Monday and Tuesday were bad. Wednesday might not be. So I had to kind of keep my head up and encourage myself to take the time to think and slow down about how my mental health is doing. And sometimes you have to rewire what you're doing. For an example, I went to university. I was taking my master's last year when I started the podcast. And so I decided to take my master's and start a podcast and a business at the exact same time. And I lasted for about 4 weeks. There was a lot of reading for the master's program of neuroscience, and I was totally overwhelmed. And I remember I was at the breaking point. I couldn't keep up. My headaches were getting way more severe, and I had been living without them. And I went to my dad's office, and I'm standing there. And you know, when people ask you, are you okay? But then they go, are you really okay? And then that's like too far of a push, and then you just break down. Well, that was me. And then I had to reorder my life. I stepped away from the master's program, focused on the podcast. Sometimes, and that happens all the time with this. And even when you think you're better, sometimes things might seem like a setback, but it's okay to reorganize and refocus. And that's what I had to do. And I had to not beat myself up about that. I had to be like, this is okay that we're changing the plan. There's nothing wrong with changing what you've been doing and readjusting the plan. So what I'm going to talk about next is actually the podcast itself. So the podcast itself is very diverse. So I like to keep it really open. So just last month we had a husband and wife talk about his injuries, and the week after we had their kids come on. So I like to focus on the family aspect of head injuries because I find it's really missed. We talk about mental health a lot. We have doctors and specialists come on as well who talk about different therapies that they do and where you can get therapy and all those types of things. And if you want to share your story on the podcast, I always tell people to reach out. We also have a lot of other things on the website, like there's a little blog there. I have not wrote on the blog for a while because the podcast is really busy. And like I said, I have to learn how to refocus and prioritize on what works for me. And that's what I have to do. Mental health events are something that I am planning to put on in the future, but COVID is kind of still here. So there's that as well. And then also Instagram, Facebook, all of that. It's all postconcussioninc.com, Post Concussion Inc. And then there's also postconcussioninc.com, but I will put a link in the chat for all of it. But if anyone has any questions, I'm definitely open for them now.
Great information. I love the mental health in a box. I've never seen that before. That's really interesting.
I made it up.
Oh, you made it up. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. I see. Very cool.
Yeah.
It. Awesome. Any questions for Bella?
I have 2 comments, 1 question.
For sure.
And no, this one is not for you, it's for the young lady. First of all, the comments. If I get upset and have to settle down, not only do I have to count my fingers, I'd have to count my toes. I'd have to count at least 4 other people's fingers and toes before maybe I'd settle down. And then the other comment I had was, I've been going to a memory cafe, and it really deals with Alzheimer's. And anyways, there's so much that coincides and really meshes together as far as TBI folks that it's worth going to. Again, my wife and I go, and we both get something out of it. That's just something to throw out. Okay, the question I really have is, I have a problem when I read something, remembering it, especially the day after.
Mm-hmm.
How the heck do I, work on that?
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing, the dementia, Alzheimer's, all that stuff is really important to be a part of as well. My dad actually has Parkinson's, and we've done a lot of therapies together. Actually, we've gone to centers together and done it because it's your brain. So a lot of it is very connected. For memory, so I have a few tips for memory. So the first thing I do is actually I text myself. It's me, it says me in my phone. And if I'm having a conversation with someone, I will pull out my phone and text myself. If I'm having a bad day on trying to remember, like say my brother mentioned something to me that I want to remember in an hour, I'll text it to myself because then I can go back in my text and look at it. Now, reading is something, and reading with memory is something that took me a long time. For me, a lot of it was pain while I read. So I found reading on different colored paper helped me a lot. I found black on yellow was easier than black on white, things like that. But I also just say, write it down. There's no shame in writing it down, or put it in your phone or text it to yourself. I live off of my calendar because I wouldn't know what I'm doing tomorrow without it. And so that can really help. But memory is definitely something that it was really tricky for me to get through. And even today, I can't go into a grocery store without a list because I will come up with nothing that I thought that I should go there for.
Well, again, with me, one of the, as far as like going to stores and stuff, yes, I do bring lists, or my wife makes sure I have a list for me. Anyways, the other thing I do is, let's say I'm in a store and something interests me,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking about getting it maybe later, I'll take a picture of it.
Oh yeah, also a great idea.
And again, with these new phones,
Mhm.
making recordings
Yeah.
again also helps. But again, my big problem is trying to read a book.
Have you tried audiobooks?
Audiobooks?
Because it takes,
No, I haven't.
I strongly recommend audiobooks because not being able to read, I felt like I was losing a part of me because before all of this, I was a book nerd. I actually kept 2 books with me at all times, just in case if I finished this first one. So I had something else to read. And so not being able to read was a really big thing for me. So Audible is actually what I use for audiobooks. And they have little previews. So I always recommend listening to the preview because the biggest thing about audiobooks is you have to like their voice. And if you hate their voice, it's not worth listening to the book. And the second thing is you can slow down or speed up the way they talk. So if they're talking way too fast, you can slow it down and slow it down in such small amounts that it doesn't make them sound kind of off or funny as they read. So I definitely recommend audiobooks. I love them, and you get just as much as you do out of reading a book. It just takes a little bit of time to get used to.
Well, since you mentioned audiobooks, I really have one more question I really have to
Oh,
ask.
go ahead.
Do I have to listen with both ears or just one? Because I only have one ear that works. Anyways, thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you.
Any other questions for Bella?
You can pretty much ask me anything. People ask me everything on the podcast. They're like, is it okay if I ask you this? I get that a lot.
I was gonna ask, well, since you said it, I'm gonna ask it then.
Oh no, like
So
just anything. Like just ask. Like that's the point of this, is to help people.
Yeah. So talk about, you don't have to get too deep, but relationships, you mentioned a boyfriend.
Yeah.
How, I mean, is he, obviously he knows about your brain injuries,
Yes.
but talk to us just about that.
Yeah.
How that
So
works.
that was difficult. We actually started dating right after that hitting the brick wall kind of thing. Definitely dealt with a lot of lash outs. He had head injuries as well. So that helped a little bit because he understood the head pain, and the chronic fatigue and things like that. But there was definitely times where I wasn't going out. I can leave the house and he could. So that would create problems. I remember being like, well, I'm trying not to expect you to stay home with me all day because I can't leave the house. But the other thing, I was trying to be really honest, but he got good at reading my face. Like we would be out with friends. Like I just turned 24, so this was like partying bar age, high school, that kind of stuff. And he would see my face and be like, oh, we need to go home. And I'd be like, yeah. And he'd be like, okay, so let's go. So it was just me being really honest and not hiding it. So it was a few times where I'd stress drink at the bar and he'd be like, you need to stop. Like you're pushing yourself too hard with school and trying to do other activities outside of it. So honesty was a really big thing, but it definitely creates problems because I wouldn't always say when I had a headache. And I wouldn't always say that, oh, I'm having a bad day. Like I remember, like we were talking about memory. We stopped at a corner store and he's like, oh, well, don't forget to grab, like we needed hand soap for the house and like 2 other things. And I came out with, I don't know, Gatorade or something. And he's like, where's like the bread? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, that's why we came here. And I'm like, and I remember I got really upset because I just like was like, I thought I was doing so much better. And I just had like this complete like, no, my brain's not working moment. And like I remember getting mad at him for thinking it was kind of funny. And it just kind of was like, okay, no, like he thinks it's funny because it is kind of funny, but like I have to slow down and not beat myself up about it. And then also be honest with him and tell him I'm actually upset about this, or like that kind of thing. Or this is how I feel, not versus like, it's not a good way to say how they feel. Like I don't like to interpret. Like I never wanted to tell him, be like, I know you feel like this. No, I feel like this. And then you tell me how you feel. And that's how we got through a lot of it. Yeah.
Of course, me being me, I am going to make a comment. Obviously, your boyfriend is very lucky because you're a very pretty young lady.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's something we want to talk about at our conference this year.
Yeah.
Kind of relationships and
For sure.
and how
We talk about it on the podcast too. I have lots of people who talk about like their marriages. Parenting is a big thing, or being the opposite. Like I was the kid and my parents dealt with me. Like, you know, I think it's good to get all perspectives because all of it matters and everyone deals with different situations.
Yes, for Andrew definitely happens to everybody.
Everyone. Yeah.
I agree. Anyone else? Any more questions for Bella? All right. Well, I think I'll let you go.
Yeah. All right.
What was that
Thank you so
website
much.
again, please?
I put a link in the chat that goes
You know
to
how to get
everything I talk about. It talks about it has earpieces that I use, the sunglasses that I use, and then it has,
good, because that was one of my questions.
Yeah, I have a discount for those too.
Sunglasses.
And then it has a link to the website, link to the podcast. It just has a link to everything, so it's the easiest one to put out there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and always feel free to email me, anybody as well. I always answer. It might take me a day or two, but I will answer.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing your story. Very powerful. I loved all of your analogies too. I wrote down some like your cake one and people only know your chapters. They don't know the whole story. That's a great one. I love looking at it from that perspective. So
yeah, well, thank you.
All right.
Have a good day, everyone.
You too. Bye.
Bye.